Nanama Duncan. They say
Yes.
technology makes your life easier. Is it true?
I think it depends. If I know the technology, then it's a lot easier. If I don't know the technology, then not necessarily so. Yeah.
It's true. And I say it's where you are on any given day, because if you're all full of anxiety and you're stressed and you have a headache, everything seems harder,
Mm.
right? Whereas if you're in your flow and you're feeling it, you're smelling your armpit and you're nice, right? You love yourself and you say, give me that. And you say, got it, you can do it. So I think it really is
Yeah,
context and time. I want to thank you for talking to me today
of
because
course.
I think um, a lot of these conversations are so new. And in your case, you've only been tenured quite recently. What year were you
Tenured for about
tenured?
a year, yeah.
A
But I've been
year.
at Carleton as a professor since 2021. Yeah.
So since 2021. And
Hmm.
with your tenureship, you
Hmm.
be are the first Black tenured professor at Carleton University.
At the
That is
journalism school, to be
relatively
specific.
new.
At the journalism school, yeah.
Okay. All
Yeah.
right. Phew, because there are others, right?
Oh, there's so many others. There are many
Okay.
others.
Because when,
I don't know if it's
you said,
many. I don't know them all, but yeah.
yeah, but in the journalism department, but
Yeah.
even still,
We do have another
we're not even going to
black
go to
black
unpack that.
professor. Yeah, we do have another black professor as well, Adrian Harewood, who came just after me. So, but
I
he's been
go
teaching
way
for longer
back.
than me.
I go way back with Adrian. Adrian and I go back to 1996.
That's amazing.
My goodness. And I mention it because, you know, my relationship with many journalists for a long time as a publicist, as a communication specialist,
Hmm.
was always, for the most part, with white journalists.
Mm.
And then I said, hey, but wait a minute. And this was when I was station manager at CKUT Radio. I'm considered to be the second Black station manager in Canada, the first being Marva Jackson. And at that point in time, when the haha moment hit me,
Mm.
I remember reaching out to the few blacks because there was always one. So at the time, there was one person at CBC. There was
Mm.
one person at the time at our one English daily here in
Hmm.
Quebec. And you started looking around. And then with campus community, this is where many of us exist and have existed for a long, long time. Then and only then was I able to get 15 or so of us in a room. And we sat in a circle, and I'll never forget it. We sat down like, wow, hey, like this, like, like
Yeah.
we have arrived. And so I have to ask the question, you came into the journalism department, and plus it's also diversity and inclusion studies,
Hmm.
and you are the CARTI chair in that department. Did you have such a aha? Um,
Mm. No, not at all. Um, the aha, as in like we are here, or I have arrived, or anything like that. Not at all, because it was just get into it, get into the work. There wasn't a lot of time to sit and reflect. I'm now, as I'm getting more used to the actual job of teaching and marking and doing research, I can reflect on how the time has been, and those those titles, being, the first Black tenured one on the faculty of journalism, and the first Black one. I mean, they're true, but they're silly in my mind. Even though,
Mhm.
they're still like they're silly, like it's stupid. Why? Why am I the it doesn't make
Yeah.
sense,
Yeah.
you know? But I do tip my hat to any other Black professor. Like being a Black person in academia is its own experience, just like being a Black person in journalism is its own unique experience. And that's actually why we're talking to each other, like I'm out here doing research on the experiences of Black journalists, as well as um, trying to create something for better reporting in and about Black communities. And I hope that the research that I do and what we end up creating ends up making things better for not only our community, but for the journalism industry.
I'm a practicing artist. I also teach creative writing to predominantly senior women. And part of the challenge has been for some of my students to be accepting and acknowledging just how authentic and valid their voice
Mm,
is.
mm,
Now, it could be because you self-identify as so many different things, or maybe you haven't had the chance, even in your retirement age, to do that sitting down and reflecting.
mm,
But they're so easy to go woman, wife,
mm,
mother,
mm.
daughter, sister, and I was a nurse for 38 years.
At the end.
And stop. Or whatever. And if they're fresh in their retirement, perhaps they start with nurse, mother, and.
Mm,
But you have a story, and I want you to start writing it because
mm,
you've been speaking about parts of those stories for years. And who best to tell your story
hmm.
than you?
Yeah, I agree.
And then I say, so now you're a writer. And oh, no, ma'am, because writer to them is, I don't know, Dr. Seuss, um, whoever the great
It's an
literary
elevated
people.
profession to them that they can't
Yeah, yeah. It's
access for
one
some
of those
reason.
ones, perhaps just after you do lawyer, doctor, teacher, and all of that kind of stuff, right? And I mention it because that's what, for the most part, a lot of journalism is today. There's hard news, but it's unfortunately crowded up or packaged as part of entertainment.
Mm,
It has all this stuff of it, unless it's in radio, the bumper right before the top, right after the top of the hour. Five
mhm,
people dead in this thing, da da da, which is kind of in
mhm,
French, they say a bilan, right? But for me, it feels like that's what hard news has become.
mm,
So I ask them when they write to consider audience. And who is your audience? So I'm going to ask you, you're now creating research. You're in the midst of it. You had to decide what the parameters of the research and all of that stuff. Do you consider the audience, or do you just
absolutely.
do the research and
Absolutely.
whoever it's for, whoever get it, catch us, catch can?
No. So, just to take a step back before I answer that, I'll tell you that what I'm doing is creating the project is called Reporting in Black Communities. And this is a research project that I'm doing with another Black professor over at Toronto Metropolitan University. Her name is Eternity Martis. And what we're looking to create is the first guide in Canada that combines the perspectives of Black community members, Black journalists, non-Black journalists, and non-Black newsroom leaders. And the idea is to create a guide with that includes an online guide, modules, like teaching modules, workshops that are all about trying to help anyone who is practicing in journalism in Canada and reporting in Black communities to do it so that they are considering Black community perspectives, and and to me it is also a way of mitigating the harm that has already happened to Black communities. Um, just even myself, I'm a Black journalist. I'm also a member of a number of Black communities, the general Black community, the African Black community, but also specifically the Ghanaian community. And when I am in a newsroom and I'm the only one, if people don't have if people have bad ideas about who I am or the communities that I come from, that's going to come out in their writing.
Mm.
And what I would prefer, because I have seen some bad journalism out there that is essentially racist and anti-Black, what I would like to see is for more journalists to have an understanding of the harm that has come to Black communities, and also um, how they can better report. So, for example, to not consider, to not only talk about a community when something bad has happened, right? How can we now tell um, journalists or equip journalists with the tools to understand that you must report in these communities that you think are bad or somehow not worthy? Go there before the bad stuff happens. Just go there. Just find stories when you're doing stories about the first snowfall, or how it's really icy, or you're doing a story about just in general renting or mortgage, that you're thinking of Black family members, Black families to go to as guests or as sources.
As well
Um,
as what we've been telling people here is, there are many movies, and the protagonist goes through their Rolodex, and they don't have Rolodex anymore. It's all on your cell phone, right? But you have contacts, and a journalist, an event planner, or whoever. You're as good as your relationships, your contacts. Who is on speed dial?
that's right.
How many of these people who are experts or has the hookups, right? How many of them are Black?
Yeah, exactly. I want
And
folks to
not
just
only for roti or
exactly,
a
and not
reggae
only for
concert
Black History
coming.
Month and all that stuff, right?
Oh,
Um, so in
girl,
my
triggering.
industry, we have the Canadian Association of Journalists, and they, for the past few years, have been conducting these diversity surveys. And in the last couple of years, what they have found is that 80% of newsrooms in Canada, the ones that were part of the survey, did not have any Black people, like none. So what does that tell you about their connections to Black communities? And what can
Mm.
that tell us about how equipped they are, the range that they have in order to report well in Black communities? Actually, we can't expect people, in a way, it makes sense that bad reporting is done. It makes sense. The system is working as it should, right? So what I'm trying to do with mine is to put a chink in the system by adding this resource. I actually am well aware that it may be naive to think that this resource is going to change anything. But to my mind, it's my job to at least create it and do the best I
Mhm.
can to promote it and to get as many people participating in the project, which is why I came to you. What I'm looking for, I should actually tell you what is happening in the project. we're going to different Black communities in Halifax, Montreal, Toronto, and Edmonton. And we want to talk to Black people about their perspectives on how they've been presented in the news. So some of the things that I would ask is, what is your relationship to the news? Do you trust journalists? What what are your thoughts on um how the news presented Black people before George Floyd was murdered? How do you feel about what the news looked like just after George Floyd was murdered? And what do you think now? What do you notice now? You know, those are the kinds of things that I'm looking for. And then as well, what should be in a guide like this? According to you, Black people in these cities, which are important to I mean, any city that any Black person is important, but specifically historically those cities are very important to the history of Canada. And so that's why we're going to these places, and we're really looking for people to participate in Montreal, because I know Montrealers have things to say.
I'm scratching. I and I'm not going to begin to answer all those questions because
No,
we'll
no.
do it when we get together.
Yeah.
But I've been a publicist going back to 1990.
Mm.
And how I got to this space is twofold. I did a film. The film was considered, wrongfully so, to be the first Black feature film. And I, "Huh?" And it took me about 6, 7 years to learn that indeed it wasn't. But all the excitement around it, um, at the film festival stage, we were talking to every major journalist, Montreal, where TIFF, which was Toronto Festivals of Festivals back then. In fact, um, the film came out 86. So we talked to everybody, radio, television, print, magazine, and not only the Canadian journalists, because in those days, the Montreal and the Toronto festivals had oodles of journalists from the US and Europe. Um, and thereafter, when I went to work,
Hmm.
thought, okay, yeah, so I'm going to have a film career or whatever, right? The only things that were out there were maid and prostitution roles. And so I scrapped that. And what had I been doing for 2 years but speaking to journalists? And I was precocious and I used to ask everybody for their business card
Hmm.
because back in the days, that's when
Yeah.
you were, everything was business cards. So it was something to come home with numbers. Like when you go in the club, how many numbers you come back with. That was
Hmm.
kind of those times. So I was at the Black Theatre Workshop, which is Canada's oldest Black professional theatre company. And they had plays and they wanted to, get drum up press. And I said, I could do that because I had everybody's card and people were taking my calls. And as a publicist, that's what you want, people who will
Yeah.
take your calls. And I was able at that time to get for a production a mention in Maclean's magazine, which was Toronto, which was in, but it wasn't necessarily on the play, but it was on Black Theatre Workshop. Any press is great press, right? And from there it continued
Hmm.
till I was formally trained at the National Film Board by Karen Marginson and worked in communications and marketing department under Hannah Semian. And so I was properly trained because it was the
Okay.
first, the first. This everything was the first, and hence why my question to you
Yeah,
about the
the
first
first.
right? It creates an energy and begats a whole bunch of other things that happen, or expectations or stress, whatever, right? And when I started doing it not only for film and theater and music, it is about those stories that are from and within the Black community.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say I trusted media to a certain degree,
Okay.
because I didn't trust them because they got quite a few of those interviews wrong. I didn't say that. And it was
Mm.
blatantly wrong. So that's when my mistrust of media started. But then as relationships grew, and then I started following the journalists that I knew. That smile, oh, you know,
Yeah.
such and such has a new piece out. So I've been in it a long time. So I'm different in that know bylines. I know
Mm-hmm.
journalists. I even look at the pictures and look at who the photographer is.
Mm-hmm.
I was always a reader. Today's reader, very few of them go past A4, right?
Mm-hmm.
Some of them don't even look at the A section. They go to the sports section or the business page, and they read the first two paragraphs.
Mm.
Some of them listen to the news on radio, and it's that 3 minute thing before. And long form journalism rarely exists. I'll close by saying this. I lucked my way into campus community radio.
Mm-hmm.
And when Black on Black violence started, it was evident that when there was particularly the murders, and I use the word intentionally, the murders by police, you knew Thursday, 3 o'clock, Saturday, 3 o'clock too, I think at the time, or 4 p.m., when the Black shows came on, everybody, not only community, but other people, because we were talking to the bereaved, the wives left behind, the
Mm.
mothers whose son it was.
Mm.
Oftentimes, we knew that person, or we knew somebody that knew them.
Mm-hmm.
So it was news coming from community primarily for. And I love Knowlton Nash, but we weren't always speaking like this I prided myself, and still to this day, that when you speak with me in an interview setting, I want you to feel I'm in your living room and me and you cock up on the couch and we're talking
Mm-hmm.
when you're comfortable. That's best listening for me, right? So I trust, but I now know because of the rise of Fox Media.
Mm-hmm.
And did we see the same event? And depending on who you read, we also had Times here called Allo Police. And their slant was anytime there was some sort of crime, black, white, whatever, they were going to get the salacious picture of
Mm.
kind of not even so much dead bodies, but the ambulance with them putting in the dead body per se, and
Okay.
and if they could find the criminal being taken away and handcuffed, and they were
Mm-hmm.
blacks, gang this, gang that, and they sold paper. They were the
They did.
National
They did. You know,
Enquirer of Montreal.
you've probably heard this in our industry, that there's a phrase called "if it bleeds, it leads," and it's an old term, but I mean, or an old phrase, but I haven't heard somebody use it saying it that way, but it is something that we've talked about. And when you couple uh, that approach of "if it bleeds, it leads," speaking to, focusing on anything that is, uh, like extreme, and crime, uh, focus on crime, um, then I mean, you mix Black people with that, and it becomes it it helps to create caricatures of us, in my opinion.
Well, look, I continuously have been pitching Black stories. I pitch stories, right?
Mhm.
But things that are happening within the Black community dating back to that time. And I will keep pitching, even why is it newsworthy? And some of my friends who are my friends go, why the hell should we care? Right? I said, and I will say, and I have said, because isn't it better to write something like this than when we're dead and bleeding?
Yep.
Right?
Um, I
There
love
was
I
a
love
man.
that they ask you why should we care, because that's actually something that, while depending on how it's said, it can sound sort of jarring. But when students are first learning about what to write, you do have to be able to defend the story. Why
Mhm.
should anyone care about this story? Why does it matter? And it's interesting. So your friends would say to you, why should you care? Why should they
And
care?
yeah, there's only one person, and I'm smiling right now because I love that person to death, right? Um, but it is, remember, those people used to go in and defend the story. If they were doing three types of stories, only three journalists out of the oodles that were in the room were going to get space. It was competitive, right? And so everybody loves those general, the ones that go viral now, right? But